Hi guys, we are on to chapter 13 of Wait Till Helen Comes. So we're going to see what happens based on Molly's new promise to protect Heather and what will happen with that. So, chapter 13. To calm myself down, I took a long walk beside the creek. Although I went all the way back to the swamp, I saw no sign of Michael. Gnats and mosquitoes buzzed in clouds around my head, biting me everywhere, even through my t-shirt. I turned around and headed home, thinking Michael must have been driven away from the swamp too. It was well after 2 when I walked into the kitchen to fix myself a sandwich. A note on the table told me that Mom and Dave had gone to Baltimore to shop for a new easel and replenish Mom's art supplies. They expected to be gone most of the day. Heather is in the living room watching TV, Mom had written. She's promised to stay in the house till you or Michael come home. I could hear a cartoon blasting away, but when I went to ask Heather if she wanted a sandwich, I saw Bugs Bunny popping out of a magician's hat without an audience. I checked in our bedroom thinking she might be taking a nap, but she wasn't there either. Or anywhere else in the house. So much for keeping her promise, I thought, as I pushed open the screen door and called her. Instead of Heather, I saw Michael coming across the grass towards the house. He was carrying a large mayonnaise jar, and when he saw me, he brandished it. "Look at the praying mantis I caught," he yelled. "Isn't it beautiful?" As he thrust the jar at me, I cringed. "Get that thing away from me." "This is one of man's best friends." Michael gazed at me reproachfully. "He eats harmful insects. In fact, I'm going to catch some beetles for him right now. Do you want to watch him eat them?" Yuck. I backed away from the creature in the jar. "That's the most disgusting invitation I've ever had." Michael shrugged. "You're lost, Molly." "Wait a minute," I called after him. "Mom and Dave had gone to Baltimore, and I can't find Heather. Have you seen her?" He shook his head and smiled at the praying mantis. Maybe this little guy thought she was a bug and ate her. Very funny. Angrily, I watched him run off, clutching his jar, leaving me to find Heather by myself. Although I didn't want to go back to the graveyard, I thought I might find her there. Reluctantly, I shoved the gate open and walked as far as the Barry's marble angel. From the shelter of his outstretched wings, I saw a new jar of daisies on Helen's grave. Of Heather herself, I saw no sign. There was, of course, only one other place to look. Harper House. Running toward the compost heap, I called Michael, thinking I could persuade him to go with me, but he had already disappeared. As I followed the path across the field, I noticed the horizon was ringed with clouds. There were thunderheads growing taller and darker, looming over the trees like a fleet of pirate ships. Despite the heat, I began to run. I was sure a storm was coming, and I wanted to find Heather before the thunder and lightning started. When I reached Harper Pond, I was gasping, out of breath from running. I paused at the bottom of the hill, trying to catch my breath and ease the ache in my ribs. Above me, the ruins seemed empty, desolate. The sky showed blue behind the empty windows, and the vines billowed in a gust of wind. Uncertain of the wisdom of calling her name out loud, I scanned the walls, searching for signs of Heather. A flash of color, a sudden movement, a sound of a voice. Seeing nothing, I began to climb the hill, wishing that Michael were with me. As I approached the house, a towering cloud drifted in front of the sun and cast everything into a shadow. At the same time, a gust of wind flipped the leaves, revealing their white undersides. I knew the rain wasn't far off, and I forced myself to run toward the shelter of the bushes, crowding against the ruined walls. Burrowing through the undergrowth like a rabbit, I found myself wondering what I was doing. Heather hated me. She made that clear hundreds of times, and I certainly didn't love her, or even like her. So why was I here, scrambling around in the bushes, getting scratched by thorns, scared to death of confronting a ghost? Why didn't I go home and leave Heather to Helen? After all, it was Helen she wanted, not me. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the sky continued to darken, and the wind blew harder. Crouching in the brambles, I peered at the race clouds, but before I could run for home, a sound from inside the house stopped me. At first, I thought it was only the wind funneling through the cracks in the walls, but the eeriness of it raised goosebumps on my arms and legs. Raising my head cautiously, I peered through the leaves, screening a window just above me. I saw Heather first. She was standing a few feet away from me, her profile turned to the window. "But I thought Daddy would be with us too," she was saying. Scarcely daring to breathe, I peered into the shadows and saw Helen. Wearing a stained and ragged white dress, she seemed less transparent than she had in the graveyard. Her dark, lusterless hair cascaded down her back, contrasting harshly with her pale, skull-like face. For her feet were bare, and she cast no shadow. When she moved closer to Heather, she made no sound. Nothing bent or rustled when she stepped on it, and her eyes were terrible, dark and glittering, and fixed upon Heather. She reminded me of a cat about to spring upon a sparrow, merciless, without compassion or sympathy, thinking only of its own hunger. "We don't need your father," murmured Helen. "We don't need anyone." As she spoke, the air in the house seemed to waft toward me, cold and smelling of damp earth and stagnant water. I shivered, suddenly aware of the sound of my heart pounding loudly with fear. I couldn't abandon Heather, not now. I had to save her from Helen, whether she wanted to be saved or not, whether I wanted to save her or not. Through my shield of leaves, I watched Helen stretch an almost fleshless hand toward Heather, a smile on her lips, death in her eyes. "Come," she said softly. "Leave this world where you are so unhappy, where no one loves you as you want to be loved. We'll go together, you and I." Heather slowly put her hand in Helen's. "You're so cold, Helen," she whispered. "Why are you so cold?" "Because I am alone. Because nobody loves me." Helen clung to both of Heather's hands as ivy clings to oak, sending its roots beneath the bark, sucking out the tree's life. "Promise you'll never leave me. Promise you'll always love me best," she whispered fiercely. "But what about Daddy?" Heather's eyes filled with tears. "I can't love you more than I love him. I can't. He betrayed you, just as my mother betrayed me. He found someone he loves more than he loves you. Their mother." The hatred in Helen's voice chilled me. I wanted to leap up and run away from Harper House to escape her, but I forced myself to stay where I was, too frightened to speak or move. "No," Heather wailed. "No, he loves me best. I know he does." "Then give me my locket," Helen hissed. "I'll find someone else to give it to, someone who will love me." She held out her hand, reaching for the chain. "Someone who won't betray me." Heather's fist closed over her little heart. "I want to be with you," she said, "but I want to be with Daddy, too." "He doesn't understand you as well as I do, does he?" Helen's voice grew sweeter. "If he knew what I know, he wouldn't love you, would he?" Heather whimpered and covered her face with her hands. Her body shook with sobs. But I'm afraid to go in the water, Helen. I'm afraid." "There's nothing to fear." Helen took Heather's hands. "If you don't come now, I'll go away, and you'll never see me again. Never. Then what friend will you have? Michael? Molly? You know they'll never be your friends. They don't care about you. They hate you as much as you hate them." Heather nodded her head, still sobbing, her face hidden by her hair. "But I know all about you, Heather, don't I? And I love you." Helen led Heather slowly toward the door as if she were guiding a blind person. "It's time to go, Heather. The mermaids in the Crystal Palace are waiting to welcome us, to make us one of them. We'll ride on enchanted seahorses in a kingdom where rain never falls and the rose never dies. Unicorns, elves, dragons, you'll see all the creatures I've told you about. We'll be so happy there, 2 princesses in our glass tower." As I watched Helen and Heather vanish into the gloom, I yearned to enter Helen's world too. Mermaids and unicorns and crystal palaces? How I longed to see them! Eager to hear more, I pushed my way out of the bushes, heedless of the brambles scratching my legs and tangling my hair. "Wait," I sobbed. "Wait for me! Don't leave me here!" A crash of thunder brought me to my senses. As startled as someone awakening from a beautiful dream, I cringed from the lightning that forked across the sky. As rain began falling, I caught sight of Helen and Heather walking hand in hand toward the pond. "Heather!" I cried, but the rain fell harder, forming a silver curtain between me and the pond, hiding Heather and Helen from me. Running down the hill, slipping and sliding on the wet grass, I reached the pond in time to see Helen leading Heather into the water. The wind blew harder and the thunder rumbled continuously, muffling my cries. "No, Heather, no!" I shouted as Helen led her further from the shore. Kicking off my shoes, I splashed toward them. The water was cold and the lightning terrified me, but I plunged in deeper, trying to keep Heather in sight. It was like chasing someone into a waterfall. When I was almost in reach of her, I tripped on a tangle of roots and splashed face down in the pond. Sputtering and gasping, I struggled to free my feet and then looked for Heather. She was nowhere in sight. All around me, the rain poured down and the water rose and fell in tiny waves, hiding both Heather and Helen. Terrified, I swam toward the place I had last seen her, Terrified, I swam toward the place I had last seen her, then dove beneath the surface, groping for an arm, a leg. Twice I came up for breath and then plunged again into the murk. Finally, my fingers tangled in something I thought was an underwater weed, and then recognized it as Heather's hair. Grasping the long strands, I yanked her upwards, struggling to get her head above water. Holding her up, I peered through the rain, searching for the shore. I got no help from Heather. She laid still, her eyes closed, her lips blue, her hair floating around her head in dark strings. As I got my bearings and started swimming toward Heather, I heard a weeping sound. It wasn't the wind in the trees. It wasn't the lapping of the water. It was Helen. In front of me, behind me, to the right, to the left, sobbing and moaning, clutching at Heather with icy fingers, she begged me to give her back. "She's mine, Helen wept. "Don't take her from me." I felt a terrible chill as her fingers seized my ankles. "Give her back to me, or I'll take you both to the bottom of the pond," she cried. "Get away!" I kicked her viciously. "Leave us alone!" "Give her to me." Helen was in front of me now, so close I could see right into her horrible eyes. "You must. She has my locket and she's mine. "No." My feet found the bottom, and I fumbled for the chain twisting around Heather's neck. Snapping it with my fingers, I hurled the silver heart as far as I could. As it disappeared into the rain, I cried, "There, take your locket. But not Heather. You can't have her." Helen moaned and turned from us to pursue the locket. Without her to slow me down, I was soon dragging Heather out of the pond. Laying her down on the ground, I crouched beside her. She was so still, so pale. "Don't be dead, Heather," I whispered. "Please don't be dead." Covering her mouth with mine, I tried to remember what we had learned in school about mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. "Breathe," I thought, "breathe." Finally, she gasped and choked, opening her eyes and staring at me. For a moment, she didn't seem to recognize me, and then her eyes filled with shock. "Molly," she whispered. "Molly, what are you doing here? Where is Helen?" She twisted her head frantically from side to side, trying to locate Helen. "She's gone," I said, glancing fearfully over my shoulder. "The rain hid the pond, hid Helen forever, I hoped." "No," Heather cried. "No, she can't be gone. She promised to take me with her. Helen," she called out. "Helen!" "She's gone," I whispered, trying to hush her. "Gone." Heather struggled against me, trying to get up. "Let me go, Molly. I want to be with Helen, not you. Let me go." Rain poured down my face, blinding me, but I held on to Heather's skinny little body. Dragging her to her feet, I began climbing the hill toward the house. I had to get Heather out of the rain. I had to warm her somehow, dry her off. The church was too far away, but if I got her to Harper House, we would have at least a little shelter. "Helen, Helen," Heather shrieked, "don't leave me." Again she tried to break away, struggling so fiercely that I could feel the bones in her arms twisting in my grip. "Let me go with my friend, my only friend." She wept piously, suddenly collapsing against me. "She's not your friend," I yelled. "She tried to kill you." No, she just wanted to take me with her. She loves me. She loves me best of all. She doesn't hate me like you do." "I don't hate you." I gripped her arms tightly, my face inches from hers. "I wouldn't have pulled you out of the pond if I hated you. I would have let you drown." Heather continued to sob. "If you knew me, really knew me, you'd hate me. Even Daddy would hate me if he knew everything about me." Heather looked behind her at the pond. "But she doesn't hate me. She knows everything and she understands. We're just alike, she and I, just alike." Let's see if I'm going to make it. Heather's tears mingled with the rain on her face. Heather! A cry came from somewhere in the rain, blowing us in the wind. Heather, where are you? Despite my grip, Heather broke free and ran to the pond. I'm coming, Helen, I'm coming, she cried as I ran after her. Catching up with her at the water's edge, I tackled her and threw her flat on her face in the weeds. She fought me in her wet clothes and her skin, making it hard to hold on to her, but she finally gave up and laid still, weeping, her body shaking with sobs. I can't find her, she cried. Her hand went to her throat, her fingers fumbling for the locket. Where is it? She cried. What did you do with it? I gave it back to her. I peered in the rain, thinking I saw Helen's pale, fair form hovering from a nearby willow tree. She can't take you if you're not wearing it, can she? How could you do it? Heather wept. How could you, my only friend, my only friend? Struggling to my feet, I half carried, half dragged Heather toward Harper House. To my relief, she seemed to have lost her strength, her will to fight me. Faintly, I could hear Helen crying, but Heather seemed oblivious to everything. As limp as a doll, she allowed me to haul her to the ruins. Soaked to the skin, shivering with the cold, we both needed dry clothes and warmth, but the best I could do was the room Michael and I had found the last time we had been here. At least a little bit of roof over our heads would protect us from the rain. This way, Heather. I guided her through the door, stepping carefully on the floorboards. Maybe we can find some matches here, light a fire or something. My teeth were chattering so hard I could barely speak, but Heather wasn't listening anyways. Listlessly, she stared straight ahead, walking by my side like a zombie or a victim of a terrible disaster. Halfway across the floor, I heard a splintering sound. The boards under our feet gave way, and the two of us plunged downward, still holding on to each other as we fell, too frightened to even cry out. So we will see what happens next. Bye.